What is the purpose of life? Why do we exist? If everything eventually fades away, what is the point of striving, building, or loving? These are the kinds of questions that haunt humanity. Questions that cut across time, culture, and social class. From ancient philosophers to modern thinkers, we've all tried to grasp the elusive meaning behind existence. But what happens when someone who seemingly has it all starts to ask these very same questions? Leo Tolstoy, one of the greatest writers in history, was a man who had every outward sign of success. Fame, fortune, a sprawling estate, a devoted wife, and 13 children. His books, such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina, were celebrated across the world, earning him a place in the pantheon of literary giants. Yet behind this public image of triumph, Tolstoy was quietly unraveling. Despite all his accomplishments, he faced an unbearable inner void. This is not just the story of a writer. It's the story of a man confronting the most profound dilemma a human can face. Why live when everything ends? Why strive when death is inevitable? How do you make sense of suffering in a world that often feels indifferent to human pain? Tolstoy's journey is a mirror of our own inner struggles. He wasn't just penning novels. He was wrestling with life's deepest mysteries. His search led him into philosophy, science, despair, and ultimately, faith. His crisis and the answers he found still resonate with millions today, showing us that the path to understanding life's purpose is often paved with doubt, discomfort, and self-discovery. In this exploration, we'll walk through Tolstoy's remarkable quest for meaning and how it forever changed him and the world. Leo Tolstoy was born in 1828 into a noble Russian family, a child of privilege and status. He grew up on the vast Yasnaya Polyana estate, surrounded by wealth, comfort, and the customs of the Russian aristocracy. But behind the splendor of his upbringing, Tolstoy was marked by personal tragedy. Orphaned at a young age, he and his siblings were raised by relatives, a loss that quietly influenced his emotional world. As a young man, Tolstoy lived a life of extremes. On one hand, he indulged in the pleasures of the aristocratic lifestyle, gambling, drinking, and fleeting romantic affairs. On the other, he was deeply introspective, wrestling with guilt and self-criticism. He began keeping personal diaries, where he meticulously recorded his moral failings and his constant efforts to improve himself. This duality between indulgence and self-reproach would follow him throughout his life. Tolstoy's literary career started with stories drawn directly from his experiences. Early works like Childhood, Boyhood, and Youth were heavily autobiographical, capturing the innocence and turbulence of growing up in Russia's elite class. His time as a soldier during the Crimean War added further complexity to his worldview, and his experiences at the front would inspire the Cossacks and other military-themed writings. Fame came quickly. By his early 30s, Tolstoy was a rising star in Russia's literary circles, mingling with influential writers and intellectuals in St. Petersburg and Moscow. But even at the peak of success, he often felt disconnected, uneasy in the company of his peers. The glitter of the literary world could not mask the growing sense of alienation brewing within him. Seeking stability, Tolstoy returned to Yasnaya Polyana and married Sophia Bears, a woman 17 years his junior. Their marriage was productive but complex, resulting in 13 children and years of personal and professional activity. During this period, Tolstoy poured himself into creating War and Peace, a sweeping novel that redefined Russian literature and secured his legacy. Yet, despite the accolades and the warmth of family life, Tolstoy couldn't escape a lingering emptiness. A disquiet began to grow, a quiet question that whispered beneath the surface of all his achievements. Is this all there is? By the time Tolstoy reached his 50s, he was standing at the pinnacle of worldly success. War and Peace had made him a literary icon. Anna Karenina had cemented his genius, and his family estate buzzed with the energy of his many children and his devoted wife. Yet, behind this picture of prosperity and creativity, a storm was brewing. The applause, the admiration, even the comforts of home. None of it seemed to touch the growing void inside him. Tolstoy began to experience what would become one of the most intense existential crises ever documented. He described it vividly in his deeply personal book, A Confession. In its pages, he admitted to being consumed by thoughts of life's apparent futility. What will come of what I do today or tomorrow, he wondered. What will come of my entire life? These questions became more than passing thoughts. They took hold of him like a heavy weight pressing on his chest. Suddenly, even life's simple joys lost their color. The laughter of his children, the beauty of nature, the recognition of his peers, all of it began to feel hollow and meaningless. Night after night he was plagued by insomnia, haunted by the terrifying thought that life might simply be an accident, ending inevitably in death and oblivion. More disturbingly, Tolstoy began to contemplate ending his own life. In A Confession, he openly writes about walking around with a rope or firearm, just in case he decided to take that final step. He didn't want to die, but he also couldn't find a reason to live. To get through the days, he resorted to mental tricks and distractions, but deep down he knew he couldn't keep running from the gnawing emptiness. What makes Tolstoy's crisis so striking is that it wasn't caused by external failures or losses. It came from within. His success, his family, even his art, no longer shielded him from life's darker questions. It was as if he had climbed to the top of the mountain, only to look out and see an endless void stretching beyond the horizon. This existential breaking point pushed Tolstoy into a desperate search for answers. Answers that neither success nor society could provide. Determined not to surrender to despair, Tolstoy launched himself into a relentless search for meaning. His journey began in the world of philosophy, diving deep into the writings of some of the world's greatest thinkers. He studied Socrates, Buddha, and Schopenhauer, hoping to find guidance or a key to unlock life's mysteries. At first, these philosophical giants intrigued him. Socrates' teachings about self-knowledge and virtue fascinated Tolstoy, while Buddha's emphasis on overcoming desire and embracing impermanence offered a pathway to inner peace. Yet Tolstoy struggled to connect these ideas to his personal experience. Socratic reason and Buddhist detachment felt distant and abstract. Answers for the mind, perhaps, but not for the aching soul. Then came Schopenhauer, whose bleak worldview nearly pushed Tolstoy deeper into despair. Schopenhauer taught that suffering was intrinsic to human existence and that life itself was a pointless struggle. This resonated with Tolstoy's darkest thoughts but provided no solution, just a grim reflection of what he already feared. Instead of hope, these philosophical perspectives left him standing at the edge of nihilism. When philosophy failed to lift the veil, Tolstoy turned to science. He hoped that the growing scientific knowledge of the 19th century might offer some rational explanation for his questions. He immersed himself in Darwin's theories of evolution and studied the latest scientific breakthroughs. However, the scientific approach only deepened his existential discomfort. Darwinism and the broader scientific worldview explained how life functioned, but not why life existed. According to these ideas, humanity was merely the outcome of random evolutionary processes, an accident of nature. In this view, humans were just biological entities destined to decay and die, with no higher purpose or ultimate meaning. To Tolstoy, science offered cold and clinical answers. It could describe the mechanics of life, but it couldn't touch the aching spiritual questions he was grappling with. Why are we here? What does it all mean? What happens after death? With each book he read, each theory he dissected, Tolstoy felt more and more disillusioned. The combination of philosophical pessimism and scientific detachment left him emotionally stranded. He longed for a deeper, more personal resolution to the unbearable questions gnawing at his soul. Still, Tolstoy pressed on. His hunger for meaning remained insatiable. In his eyes, neither reason nor empirical evidence could fill the hole inside him. The deeper he searched, the more convinced he became that life's answers couldn't be fully found in logic or science alone. And so, Tolstoy turned inward again, determined to explore how people, including himself, were dealing with the absurdity of life, and what responses, if any, could lead to salvation. As Tolstoy wrestled with the unbearable question of life's meaning, he identified 4 distinct ways people typically respond to life's absurdity. In a confession, he carefully outlines these approaches, trying to determine which, if any, offered a way out of his despair. The first approach was to ignore the problem entirely. Tolstoy noticed that many people simply lived their lives without stopping to question their existence. They busied themselves with daily routines, work, family, social obligations, without reflecting on deeper questions. For some, this unconscious approach brought temporary peace, but for Tolstoy, it felt shallow and fragile. He saw it as a house of cards, bound to collapse when hardship or mortality finally forced someone to confront life's deeper mysteries. The second approach was to seek pleasure as a distraction. Here, Tolstoy saw people throwing themselves into materialism, hedonism, and constant consumption. Whether it was wealth, relationships, or status, many tried to numb their existential anxieties through pleasure and distraction. Tolstoy understood this method well. He had lived it himself in his younger years. Yet he concluded that pleasure was only a temporary anesthetic. Like the man licking honey while dangling over a deadly abyss, a metaphor Tolstoy famously used, pleasure might be sweet, but it never prevents the inevitable fall. The third approach was the most extreme: despair and the desire for death. Tolstoy had stared this option in the face during his darkest moments. For some, life's meaninglessness led directly to the belief that suicide was the only logical escape. He empathized deeply with those who followed this path, acknowledging the pain that could make such a decision feel inevitable. Yet Tolstoy ultimately rejected it, believing that surrendering to despair didn't resolve the existential riddle. It only silenced it permanently. The fourth approach was passive resignation. This, according to Tolstoy, was the most stagnant and paralyzing choice. In this state, a person recognizes the absurdity of life but refuses to confront it fully. They drift through life in a kind of emotional limbo, aware of the emptiness yet unwilling or unable to act. To Tolstoy, this was the most unsatisfactory option, leaving individuals stuck in perpetual uncertainty and quiet desperation. In analyzing these 4 paths, Tolstoy found partial truths in each. Yet none of them felt complete or capable of offering the profound peace he sought. Ignoring life's questions seemed cowardly, pleasure-seeking felt hollow, despair was tragic, and resignation left him frozen. Still, Tolstoy refused to give up. Instead, this reflection became the catalyst for him to look beyond intellectual frameworks and societal habits. His attention turned to something that many intellectuals of his time often overlooked: the quiet faith and resilience of ordinary people. As Tolstoy stood on the brink of hopelessness, he found unexpected inspiration, not in books or salons, but among the common people who worked the land around him. The peasants, simple farmers who toiled daily in harsh conditions, seemed to live with a quiet strength and serenity that he could not explain. Despite poverty, hardship, and suffering, they carried themselves with a sense of purpose. Tolstoy observed them closely and noticed something profound: their unshakable faith. These men and women, with far fewer resources and comforts than Tolstoy, faced life's same fundamental questions. Yet they did so with a humility and acceptance that evaded the intellectual circles Tolstoy had long been part of. Their belief in God, their trust in the rhythms of life, and their acceptance of suffering as part of a larger spiritual picture struck Tolstoy like a revelation. For the first time, he began to see faith not as a dogmatic escape from reason, but as a means of transcending it. Faith, in its purest form, allowed these humble people to live with hope, even amid inevitable suffering and death. It wasn't that they had all the answers. Rather, they had a deep trust in the value of life, rooted in something larger than themselves. Tolstoy realized that the answers he had sought in philosophy and science could only take him so far. Rationality might explain the mechanics of life, but it couldn't provide the personal peace and inner clarity that faith offered. This discovery marked a turning point. He began to understand that accepting life's mysteries rather than dissecting them endlessly might be the key to moving beyond despair. It was here, among the peasants, that Tolstoy glimpsed a path toward redemption. Tolstoy's realization sparked a profound transformation. He gradually abandoned the wealth and privileges of aristocratic life, turning away from the trappings of fame and luxury. Instead, he devoted himself to simplicity, manual labor, and acts of service to those less fortunate. His once grand estate became a place where he engaged directly with the peasants, working alongside them and living by the principles he had come to admire. Spiritually, Tolstoy's beliefs evolved into a personal form of Christianity, rooted in compassion, nonviolence, and humility. He distanced himself from the Orthodox Church, which he saw as too closely tied to state power and ritualistic tradition. Instead, he focused on the core teachings of Jesus, especially the Sermon on the Mount, which emphasized love, forgiveness, and turning the other cheek. This transformation wasn't just personal, it deeply influenced his later writings and actions. Books like The Kingdom of God is Within You laid out his vision for a more ethical and spiritually grounded life, inspiring future leaders such as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. With his advocacy for nonviolent resistance and moral integrity, Tolstoy's legacy endures not only through his literary masterpieces, but also through his courageous journey toward spiritual awakening. His life stands as a reminder that even those who seem to have it all are not immune to the deepest questions of human existence. And sometimes, the answers lie not in intellect or power, but in humility, faith, and service to others. Tolstoy's search for truth continues to resonate today, challenging modern audiences to rethink success, happiness, and the pursuit of meaning. His story shows us that the quest for life's purpose is universal, and that peace is often found in the simplest of places.